This story begins where place names ring with the romance of history and where ancient ways of life still persist. Burma, just to the east of the Bay of Bengal, a nation of emerald rice fields and richly decorated Buddhist temples. Here in Mandalay in February 1982, twins were born to Nyi and Myint Tut, a young engineer and his wife, their first children. But 6 days later, even before the new mother had been allowed to see her babies, they were whisked away. 450 miles to the south, to a children's hospital in Rangoon. It was the only thing to do. Against odds of over 50,000 to 1, the twinning process had been incomplete. The infants were joined at abdomen and hip. In a linkage so complex, surgical separation was almost out of the question. The father, Nyi Tut, viewed the calamity in the light of his Buddhist belief in reincarnation.
Previous life. Maybe in the previous lives we did something wrong, and the kids also did something wrong.
Soon the hospital staff in Rangoon had taken the place of the twins' family.
The parents were very seldom at the children's side because they were of the perception that the children would not live. The parental love was shown more or less by the nurses of the hospital. They began feeding them and looking after them and taking them away.
They were named Lin and Win by the nurses who cared for them. It seemed that their whole world might be reduced to a hospital ward for the rest of their lives, until new hope was born, with a trip taken by a Toronto doctor, Alan Kahn.
In 1983, I was on a 6 weeks lecture tour through Southeast Asia. One of the ports of call was Burma. What was of particular interest was that in Rangoon is a 550-bed children's hospital that had been built and given to the government of Burma and opened by our ambassador in 1970. And on taking a little tour of the wards, lo and behold, was a pair of Siamese twins, age 1 year, who'd been there almost since birth.
Dr. Kahn found the children in good health, but severely handicapped by their conjoined condition. And yet any hope of surgical separation would demand the kind of medical technology and expertise that were simply not available in Burma. The Burmese revere tradition and still resist much of the modernization that's changing most of Southeastern Asia. However, Burma was not able to go as far as changing the future of Lin and Win Tut. So the doctors in Rangoon asked, what about Canada? It took 15 months of organizing and fundraising, including a donation made by the Canadian government to the Herbie Fund, a fund set up in 1979 to bring another child to a Canadian medical center for vital surgery. And the name of that center? The Hospital for Sick Children in Toronto, a truly remarkable institution known affectionately everywhere as Sick Kids. The twins arrived in a bright red breadbasket. For both financial and family reasons, the parents had decided to stay in Burma and entrust the children to Canadian doctors.
These babies were in bad shape in the sense that they were trapped and tied to each other in such a way that they couldn't move. One could sit while the other was lying, and while they could live for many years and breathe and think, they certainly couldn't come close to leading an independent life as you or I would know it.
Their development had been delayed by lack of mobility and restricted environment, but already 2 individual personalities had emerged. Lin, the smaller of the twins, was the lively one. Wynn was more placid. If any place could give these children the chance of developing their own individualities, apart from each other, it was Sick Kids. For over 100 years, this hospital had been a beacon of hope to sick children and their families. It had grown through the years in size and capability until it could focus the attention of a whole spectrum of experts on every medical problem brought through its doors. Years of effort here have brought new ways of answering the needs of babies born too soon or with some critical defect, of children stricken with injury or disease. (1966) brought the first separation of conjoined twins at Sick Kids. The surgeon was Dr. James Simpson. The infants joined at the abdomen. As with Lynn and Wynn, something had gone wrong in the womb, with a single fertilized egg developing, but failing to divide completely as twin embryos were being formed. And now in July 1984, the most challenging separation ever attempted here. The operation on the Toot twins was to be under the guidance of the surgeon-in-chief, Dr. Robert Filler. He would head a team of plastic surgeons, orthopedic surgeons, urologists, and that was just the beginning.
In addition, it was quite obvious that we needed expert anesthesia help, which is available here, so the anesthetist had to form a very important part of this team. We did have diagnostic studies that had to be completed to confirm the clinical impressions of what was joined and what wasn't and how things were functioning. And we had to involve our diagnostic imaging people, commonly called radiologists, but they like to be called imagers now.
The diagnostic studies confirmed and amplified what the Rangoon doctors had discovered. It wasn't just skin and muscle that joined the twins. Blood flowed from one body to the other, which would cause problems for the anesthetists. The two livers were connected. Part of the intestinal tract was shared. Their bladders were fused. They had only a single pelvis between them and only one functional leg each. The third leg was underdeveloped and useless. In spite of the complexity of the join, it was decided to achieve separation of the twins in a single surgical session, rather than in a series of operations staged over a period of months. Within the hospital were all the needed surgical skills and the ability to plan and coordinate every detail of the long and challenging procedure. Jean Savikas was the operating nurse in charge of logistical planning. She made sure of the availability of whoever and whatever might be needed, including special draping designed to match the shape of the two conjoined bodies and fitted with Velcro seams that could be pulled apart at the moment of separation.
Like that, for that size. And then the next thing we need to do is you have to cut.
Over a dozen nurses were assigned to the operating room to work 12-hour shifts. Other departments, bacteriologists, virologists, the blood bank would be standing by. And various therapists were already planning their post-operative work. As with a later set of twins, there was even a dress rehearsal.
Who's going to do that? The nurses?
The nurses will do that. The two scrub nurses will do that for you. Okay. So because remember that they will not obviously totally be lifted off the table because of all the equipment and things up here.
Plastics and general surgery.
Like that. All right. Team.
Everybody's all set, right?
Breakfast, right?
At last, all the preparation and planning were completed. The crucial day of surgery had finally arrived. July 28th. By 8 a.m., the operating room was packed. The patients would effectively start out as one individual and end up as two, so the number of machines and people was double the usual. The anesthetic team was headed by Dr. Robert Creighton. As well as keeping the twins free of pain, it was their job to monitor and adjust all vital bodily functions during the whole operation, making sure especially that oxygen and blood supplies were kept up, both before and after separation. At 8:30, the first incision was made, along a line that had been carefully plotted by the plastic surgeons, Doctors Lindsay and Zucker, who aimed for the best possible division of skin and muscle to close the wounds. Surgeons Robert Filler and Barry Shandling now cut through the abdominal wall and separated the narrow bridge that linked the two livers. Next, the single lower part of the large intestine was divided in two, with the walls of each section stapled together to form separate channels. By then, it was time for the urologists to go to work, led by Dr. Bernard Churchill. The twins each had one functional kidney and one ureter leading to the fused bladders. But there, the first problem was encountered. All that separated the two bladders was an extremely thin lining. According to the urologists, cutting apart that lining, which was only 3 cells thick, was like trying to separate 2 pieces of wet tissue paper. By now, the anesthetist had to deal with massive bleeding. It meant weighing every sponge to help calculate blood loss. Lynn was to lose 6 times the amount of blood his body contained. Win even more, over 8 times normal blood volume.
I think it's important to know that in the separation of the twins, there was no one single knight in shining armor. And every single person had to work as a cohesive team.
If there were any heroes involved in this story, they were the 2 children. They were the only ones who really were important.
The urologists now completed the separation of the urinary tract, dissecting apart the necks of the bladders and the intertwined urethras.
It was going to be tougher than we thought it was going to be. They were actually wrapped around each other and forming an intertwined helix, which to separate them would require unraveling it.
Really?
Dr. Filler now continued with the intestinal tract. Lynn's small intestine was separated from the shared large intestine to be joined eventually to his portion of the divided colon and rectum. Next, the orthopedic surgeons, led by Dr. Walter Babechko, divided the pelvis. Finally, Dr. Filler prepared to make the incision that would separate the twins. It was exactly 8:15 p.m., 12 hours since surgery had begun, that Lynn and Win Toot began their lives in 2 independent bodies. It would take effort, ingenuity, and over 5 more hours to finish the job. For Lynn, it meant connecting the small and large intestines and then removing the bones from the small, otherwise useless leg that had been shared by the twins and using its skin and muscle to close over the wound on Lynn's left side. Win didn't have enough skin for closure, so synthetic material had to be stitched on to enlarge the flaps used to cover the gaping hole in Win's right side. And now, at last, the surgical team's extraordinary task was completed. The whole procedure had taken over 17 hours and involved a team of 43, 8 surgeons, 5 anesthetists, 16 residents, and 14 nurses, plus an incredible number of instruments and machines. It was a remarkable accomplishment. By 2 a.m., the twins were back in the intensive care unit, resting and in good, carefully watched condition. The longest day of their lives was over. best in monitoring and life support systems, and a superbly trained nursing staff to provide the children with the one-to-one intensive care they needed. The head of the unit was the twins' personal physician, Dr. Jeffrey Barker.
It was quite a remarkable performance to get these two children through what they had to go through and bring them back to us in the fine state that they are in. Indeed, we were anticipating problems for the first 24 hours.
And problems did develop. Wynne had to return to the operating room for emergency surgery to stop internal bleeding.
You remember this never moved before? What's happened there? What's happened? Put your hand in there. Yeah, I can't believe what that was not fun.
The bleeding was quickly dealt with, and Wynne rejoined Lynn in intensive care. On the other side of the globe, Nyi and Myint were home with their 6-month-old daughter. They waited anxiously for news of the operation. So did the hospital staff in Rangoon.
All the hospital people, I'm the person who's been in the hospital longest, came around me and said, are they alive? When I heard that they were both separated and that Lynn was doing well, but Wynne was a little on a critical list. The news, all the nurses were standing by, all the doctors were standing by, so I had to phone everyone all around and say, well, that is it, they've done it.
And then the rest of the world was given the good news.
It was an exciting time for everyone. And I guess our epinephrine levels, our adrenaline levels were high enough to keep us pretty much awake. And we were really pleased with what we were able to do for these children.
Lynn was recovering a little ahead of Wynne, whose massive wound was taking longer to heal. Periodically, tucks were taken in her synthetic closure material to draw the flaps of skin closer together. After 6 weeks in intensive care, the twins were moved to Ward 8E, which was specialized for looking after children with a high risk of infection. Both children had come through their surgical ordeal in remarkably good shape, but they still had a long way to go before being ready for life outside a hospital. It would take months of rehabilitation. Psychiatrist Susan Bradley monitored the psychological effects of the operation.
Well, certainly at first we were concerned about the impact of separating them, and there was very little literature to guide us with respect to what we would expect. Kids by age 3, if they were mobile, would have explored their environment, would have touched all sorts of things, would have been able to crawl around things, know that things come down on you, know how to balance themselves, know all of these very fundamental kinds of things. And these children really, because they have been on their backs or sitting looking at things, really haven't had those kinds of experiences. So we've been doing a total package.
The package was designed to help the twins gain the development denied them when they were conjoined. It involved physiotherapy, recreational therapy, and under the guidance of Joan Cameron, occupational therapy.
My initial focus was orientation in space. We talked a lot about in and out, and we were doing in and out with toys, and we were doing in and out with balls and up and down, threading beads, and talking about going through.
Knock, knock. That's a boy. Where's your truck? Can you bring your truck in with you?
Reaching and identifying to develop balance, to encourage an upright sitting position, something the children had once had to do one at a time.
There we go. Ernie's nose.
Here we go.
Lynn was now well enough for daily sessions in the hospital's rehabilitation unit, where the strategy is to turn therapy into fun.
Here it comes. Whoa. The ball. Okay, let's go get it. Can we go get it?
Meanwhile, Wynne was still confined to Ward 8E, but she too was hard at work at the catching up process.
cup of tea. There's your cup of tea.
Making progress at different rates and now able to spend time apart, the children, like most twins, were still close.
Yeah, you have a drink of juice now.
Now it was not a crippling bond of flesh that held them together, but love.
Come back. Come back this way.
Come on.
By late September, 2 special members of the therapy team were at work, the twins' parents. They were in Toronto for a month, learning what kind of activity they would ultimately need to encourage at home, working with, among others, physiotherapist Sue Rocksmith.
We generally try and encourage the parents to participate in the therapy programs. For us, it's important that they learn and become part of the total development of their child. We really enjoyed having them come down. It gave them a special time to bond with the children away from all the medical aspects of the hospital.
It would have taken the Toots' life savings to come to Canada on their own. Their expenses were shared by the Burmese government and a number of Toronto businesses. When it was time for the couple to return to their baby girl in Burma, they made sure the twins wouldn't forget them. They were also sure the nurses and therapists would gladly provide the loving care so necessary to the growing youngsters. By November, Lynn was ready to visit the Hugh McMillan Medical Centre, formerly the Ontario Crippled Children's Centre, where over 500 children each year receive artificial limbs.
Step so you can check the bucket. Maybe just go as though you're checking the bucket around. Right there?
It's okay, Lynn.
That looks okay?
Only a few are fitted with the kind Lynn needed, something to replace part of the pelvis, as well as a leg.
Let's make that big front go down.
Sheila Hubbard was in charge of this phase of the therapy.
A prosthesis of this nature, which is really replacing 3 artificial joints, a hip, knee, and a foot, will never be as normal in activity as his own leg. At the best, it's forming a stabilizing position for him. It will bend, and it will allow him to walk on it.
Okay. See if we can get you to turn around. Good.
That's Beverley Walter.
Ever since the surgical separation, the opening on Wynn's side had gradually been made smaller by taking tucks in the synthetic material and drawing the edges of skin closer together. In January 1985, a final visit to the operating room to close the wound with her own skin, which would reduce the risk of infection and considerably speed up her rehabilitation. And just over a week later, Wynn was able to join her brother in a lively celebration of their 3rd birthday. People crowded in from the many departments that had been involved with the twins. There were over 600 other young patients receiving the hospital's attention that day, but there was still something special about the courage of Lynn and Wynn. Over the next 5 months, Lynn continued to gain more control over his body and his artificial leg.
Good boy. This is a first, isn't it? Oh, put your foot down. That's good.
He was actually ready to return home, but not so with Wynn. She was coming along, but she was still a little unsure of herself and had a spinal curvature that needed correcting, which would prolong her stay in Toronto. The doctors thought it might be wise to keep the twins together at this crucial stage of their development. But then something happened to change their minds. Wynne at last began to smile.
No laughing! No laughing!
Released from the need to spend all her time in Ward 8E, she finally felt more comfortable with her new independence. And once her progress had speeded up, it was decided that neither twin would be harmed if Lynn indeed were to go home. Inevitably, there were mixed feelings in the hospital when it came time for him to leave.
You gotta grab it. I got it. I got it. No, Mom. Not for you. You gotta grab it. Grab it.
Allison Miller had been part of the twins' nursing team for 10 months. It was now her job to accompany Lynn to Burma. Both were engaging children, but with Lynn's active, outgoing nature, it was going to be hard for everyone to say goodbye to him. Nevertheless, on July 10th, the time had come. Also on the flight was Dr. Alan Kahn, who'd first seen the now famous Toot twins in Burma in 1983. It had been an exciting day. Almost 9,000 miles later, Rangoon, and a reunion with happy parents. Before heading north to their house near Mandalay, the Toots took Lynn to what had been home to him for almost 2.5 years, the Rangoon Children's Hospital. As in Toronto, the staff had become a stand-in family to the twins and were as proud of their part in the story as they were happy at its outcome.
When I saw Lynn enter the hospital, I think I've mentioned it before, that there is something in the medical world that you can never say you are happy or you are just enamored with it, but it's something, a feeling that you say, well, that's a job well done.
Seeing the sights of Rangoon was just as much a novelty for Lynn as it was for Allison Miller. His native culture was now far less familiar to him than the one he'd experienced in Toronto. Then it was time to catch the train to Mandalay and to move through the last stages of this long journey home. At last, the party arrived at the town of Segang, about 12 miles west of Mandalay, a part of the world that Lynn would now learn to see as his own. The Toots were well aware it would take Lynn time to adjust to a home he'd never seen, to a family he hardly knew. They were all prepared for what might happen when it was time for Lynn to say goodbye to the nurse he'd seen for almost every day over the past 10 months. The moment wasn't going to be easy for anyone. And what about Wynne, back in Toronto? A world away from her twin brother.
She didn't really miss Lynn when he left. She actually has enjoyed the last 3 months. Lynn was always in the limelight. He was always the one getting all the attention. She was the one in the back burner. And Wynne now has to speak up for everything she wants, and everybody's giving her all the attention, and it's been absolutely good for her. It's been terrific.
Cindy Guernsey was one of the nurses who spent a lot of time with Wynne, helping her get used to her new prosthesis, reinforcing the idea that a family was waiting in Burma for her return, and that there was a whole world outside of any hospital. They even went on a trip to Cindy's cottage.
I picked her up and she was so excited. She was just so excited. We got in the car and she's used to going in my car, so she was really good. It's a 2-hour drive from here, no problems at all. We get to the beach and she likes the sand, and we went into the water. She didn't want out of the water, and it was a nice day, nice sunny day, and she was really happy. It was really nice.
Meanwhile, in Burma, Lynn was learning to accept that he had a new sister, Mo, who'd been born 6 months before the twins were taken to Toronto. He was also learning a new language and eating new food, absorbing a whole new culture. Canada and Lynn's native land were, in more ways than one, worlds apart. There was little evidence here of the high-tech world the twins had tasted in Toronto. Some examples of Western culture do manage to enter the country, but what's made in Burma is more likely to be the product of the same kind of ancient craftsmanship that adorns the thousands of Buddhist shrines and temples across the land. This socialist republic still has military leadership. Armed soldiers are a common sight. So to westernize is poverty. Most Burmese families live lives of utter simplicity. The Tut family are among the more affluent in Burma, with an up-to-date bungalow and a professional salary. Still, for both Lynn and Wynne, the move home would bring many changes. In Toronto, Wynne had developed a taste for North America's fast food.
What do you want to drink? Do you want some milk? Or do you want some Coke? Coke. Initially going, both her and Lynn, we took them together. They wouldn't eat much. They might have a French fry. And now they enjoy it, and it's a big treat. And right now it's hamburgers. Hamburgers and French fries with ketchup. No pickle.
One of Wynne's problems was that her own left leg had always been carried at an angle to her body, a legacy of the join between the twins. Now, for months, a special binding had been used at night to bring the leg down into position for walking. At last, the technique had done its work. Cindy knew that it was now time for Wynne to join her family in Burma.
She's been in a hospital for 3.5 years. That's not such a good place to grow up. You don't get the stimulation you need, and it's not a home environment. So it's going to be nice to have her in a home environment, in a normal environment. But it's going to be sad to have her go. She's just like having your own little girl, and I love her a lot.
Okay, bye.
I've had her for over a year, and it's just going to be strange. There's going to be an emptiness there for a while.
In October, a press conference at the hospital signaled Wynn's imminent departure for Burma. Dr. Alan Kahn gave perspective to the twins' story.
This is the first time ever that this type of Siamese twin, who are very complicated, have been separated at one surgical procedure. There have only been, I think it's 8 separations in all of the medical literature, and half of them died.
Psychiatrist Susan Bradley.
I've been very impressed with the progress that Wynn has made both emotionally and intellectually over the period of time that she's been on 8E. And I think that this is in large measure a product of the very good care that she's had up there. This allowed her, I believe, to form an attachment. Once she had done that and begun to feel secure, she really began to take off emotionally and intellectually.
Head nurse on the twins' ward, Betty Cormier.
Like, sure, it's sadness today, but personally, I'm swelling with pride because I think that the staff has done an excellent job of not only helping 2 children be individuals, socially, emotionally, physically, but they also are sending home 2 happy individuals who are now going to be a part of a family for the first time in their lives and share.
You better.
I got a big hug.
You want to get a big hug?
Yeah, Carter.
Give Lynn a kiss, Betty. Okay, darling.
Everyone wondered what would happen when the twins were reunited. It may just have been too much noise and excitement, perhaps even the realization that all the attention they had each been receiving would now once again have to be shared. Whatever their cause, the tears would soon stop.
Come, baby.
Trying to run away, huh?
At home, the parents got some last-minute advice on dealing with the twins' future. Quite apart from what the Toots would be able to handle themselves on a day-to-day basis, Lynn and Wynn would both need expert attention.
Can you help Dee?
They still had a lot of growing to do.
No way.
And that meant that their artificial legs would need periodic adjustment. The Hospital for Sick Children had made arrangements with orthopedic specialists in Singapore to work with the twins in updating their artificial limbs. Lynn was still a bit ahead of his sister in his mobility.
A few days before we left to bring Wynn back, she began to be able to walk. She had to be encouraged, but she wanted to because all the other children on the ward were walking. But it's been a little more difficult because she has to swing her whole pelvis, and she hasn't got quite a large pelvis as Lynn. When they were separated, Lynn got more of the ring of pelvis with the legs than she did. And she's growing a new one, but this takes quite a bit of time.
Wynn was rapidly adjusting to her new home and to her family.
Mommy.
Where mommy? Where mommy? Show mommy.
Mama. She was doing very well last 2 or 3 days. She eats a lot. Plain rice, plain water, and she play with Lynn. Everything is quite okay. Lynn is here to stay with her. This transition is much more easier than Lynn.
Cindy's goodbyes would be a little easier too. She was leaving a completely reunited family.
First, I didn't believe these twins can separate and they have a normal life like this one. Now we have all separate lives, 3 children, and quite a big family we have. Now we are very happy now.
They will be disabled for sure. Having one lower limb does cause its problems. But I think you've seen people run across Canada with one limb, and that's quite a feat. So really, the human spirit can do a heck of a lot with certain disabilities.
Without the generosity and medical expertise that led to their separation, all the twins could have looked forward to was a world of limitations and frustrated hopes. But new and independent worlds lay within their grasp, now that they could ultimately live apart. When Lynn and Win were born and their future looked so bleak, their grandfather had gone to a fortune teller.
So he read the horoscope, and he told the grandfather, "Don't worry. This set of twins will live. For about 2-3 years, they are going to be in the hospital compound with doctors and nurses. After that, they will come home, and they are going to become important people." So, well, so far, it's true.
In a world so full of doubt, let love smile on every child. Eyes that shine like tiny stars, miracle of life they are. In a world so full of pain, give the child a home again. Tiny hands that reach for love, fragile as the air above. In this world so full of pain, the heartbeat of a child is a song that still remains. There ain't a single thing that matters more than the love of a child. In this world so full of fear, the laughter of a child is a song we need to hear. There ain't a single thing that matters more than the love of a child.